Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.
With New Year's resolutions, many of us will make a vow to eat healthier, and that's a good thing. But what about our beloved pets and their nutrition? Greetings, naturopathic Dr. Dennis Black here, and I'm on a mission to provide better nutrition for cats and dogs because truthfully, all pet food is dead food, which is why we created Rough Greens and Meow Greens in the first place. We bring their food back to life with live vitamins, minerals, probiotics, enzymes, omega oils, antioxidants, and so much more. All in a tasty formula that your dog and cat will love. You can improve your pet's coat, digestion, energy, and have less vet bills. Let 2025 bring a new year and a new pet. Get a Jumpstart trial bag, normally $20. Get a 100% discount with promo code BESTFRIEND. You discover the shipping. Go to roughgreens.com, use promo code BESTFRIEND. Bring your pet's food back to life with Rough Greens. So good, your pet will ask for it by name.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me through Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting at my website, emailrevealer.com. And if you like our guest today, Phil Stanford, we have a previous show with him, author of White House Call Girl, The Real Watergate Story. That's up on Spreaker. You can go there and listen to that. I just recently had Lisa Peace on the show talking about her JFK book. And I mentioned Phil Stanford and his theory here on the White House Call Girl, and she was very agreeable to it. Phil Stanford, are you there?
I am here. Good talking to you, Ed.
Yeah, man, it's great to have you back. It's been a long time, 2014. It's 9 long years. No, 5 long years. I'm not so good at math. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's. I think you nailed that one, yeah.
Now, Phil, you got this great new podcast coming out here. It's the second episode, just came out here every Thursday morning on iHeartRadio, Murder in Oregon. Why don't you remind the audience, though, of who is Phil Stanford?
Okay, well, I've written for magazines. I was a columnist for the Oregonian and the Portland Tribune for a while. I've written several books on corruption. Even the Watergate book you mentioned is really about corruption. It's about the mob angle in the Watergate break-in. But the other 3 books, Portland Confidential, Peyton Allen Files, and Rose City Vice, which is my latest book, are about police corruption and in Portland, Oregon. The try to tell them as stories so that they're not too boring, and that seems to carry over pretty well to the podcast medium. This is the first time I've done a podcast, and it's fun, and it's turning out to be pretty successful. We're pushing. Been out a week, and we're pushing the top 10 nationally.
Oh, very good, very good. And like we were saying off there, you got a great voice for this kind of thing. Now, your previous books, Rose City Vice and Portland Confidential, the Peyton Allen Files, all these different books you've written previously, touch on police corruption up there in Portland. Have you experienced any kind of ramifications from that, like a pushback from the cops and the DA's office and stuff?
Well, you always get pushback. And the first book was Portland Confidential, was about the old payoff system in Portland, which no one wanted to admit at the time. And even though I was talking about the 50s and 60s, there was a great deal of resistance. The last payoff mayor was a guy named Terry Shrunk, and as it happened, his son, Michael Shrunk, was the DA. He was not happy about it, although he was polite about it. But no one really, even after the book came out, wanted to acknowledge it. It was a regional bestseller. Wanted to acknowledge that it was anything more. First of all, they didn't want to acknowledge that it happened. When they finally had to admit, yes, there was a big payoff scandal at the time, a big corruption scandal, a vice scandal at the time. They didn't want to admit that it was anything more than a temporary aberration. The one I had learned long ago that the people in power, official people, really don't want to talk about these things and reveal anything that's that embarrassing. The last book, Rose City Vice, was about a narcotics scandal, narcotics cop scandal in Portland in the 70s and 80s, and that was a little bit. The pushback was even greater there, and I found that my best sources, besides documents, were people in the underworld, because the cops almost across the board didn't want to talk about it. Even the cops who weren't dirty didn't want to talk about it, because they feel bound to protect their fellow officers, even if they're corrupt, or they feel they're protecting and I think this is true also, the reputation of the police bureau. So I ended up getting a lot of information, and most of my stories, in fact, from sort of semi-retired crooks who were happy to talk about things because the statute of limitations had run on everything except murder, and they're more than happy to talk about how corrupt how the cops were, more often than not, as corrupt as they were.
Mm. Yeah, and old crooks do love to gossip. They love to talk, you know. You can get them on.
Oh, yeah, they've got great stories, too.
It's so shit. Oh, yeah, it's... Anyway, the latest story, okay, that the podcast is about, murder in Oregon. Okay, it's on iHeartRadio, like we said, comes out every Thursday morning. It's about again, allegedly corrupt corrections department chief there was murdered. Now, I know you can't tell us everything because this is like a whodunit. This is a serious.
Okay, well, the chief who was murdered had just been brought in, and he had discovered, his name is Michael Franke. That's the subhead of the podcast, Murder in Oregon, Who Murdered Michael Franke? And he had been brought in a little bit over a year before to straighten out the department and get things running straight. And he was brought in from New Mexico, where he'd been in charge down there. He was not a typical warden, not a movie police, prison warden. And he was a former lawyer, former judge. Young guys in his 40s. That's young to me. And he had, and he was a very humane person too. But he was brought in, and he discovered that there was serious corruption in his department. And he started investigating it, and was going to clean house. Told his younger brother that he was going. He discovered an organized criminal element. Those were his words. In his department, he's going to be cleaning house. And the night before, he was scheduled to address a legislative subcommittee. He was murdered outside the building where he worked. He was stabbed in the heart. His body was discovered hours later, been lying in front of the porch. Although they would later claim that they had conducted in front of the building, and although they would later claim that they had conducted a thorough search of the building, his body was out there lying on a porch. And what ensued, as we know now, I mean, this was January 17th, 1989, when he was killed. So it's 30 years ago. And from the beginning, there were questions. I mean, a lot of things just didn't make sense.
Well, let me stop you for 1 second. Let me stop you for 1 second. Because I don't care what town you're in. Okay, now this happened in Portland, Oregon?
Pardon?
This happened in Portland, Oregon?
No, I'm sorry. It was in the state capital, which is Salem.
Salem, Oregon.
It's
Okay.
about 50 miles south of Portland. Yeah.
Okay. Now I don't care. But I don't care what town you're in. Okay. If the top cop or the top corrections officer, his body's found dead in a parking lot, every single cop, right, within 100 miles is zipping over there, and they're doing perimeters and dogs. They got helicopters. Did that happen?
Well, they had a big police scene out there, but what happened, and it's quite clear now, is that from the beginning, the official investigation was a cover-up. And, it was very difficult to understand that at the beginning, because the police, for what are usually very good reasons, keep the information close. But all the records have been released by now, and we've had a chance to do our own investigation. And it's quite clear that, it was an assassination. It was a cover-up. After about a year and a half, there was so much pressure. I was writing a column for the Oregonian at the time, and I kept raising questions about it. And I wasn't the only one. This is the amazing thing about it, that two brothers of Michael Franke, the man who was murdered, both questioned the official investigation from the beginning, because after all, one of the brothers, Kevin, had that conversation with his brother, who weeks before the murder, about how he was cleaning house in his department, and because of the pressure, they had to do something. They had to do something. So what they did was set up a patsy. They manufactured the evidence against him. They convicted him and sent him to prison for life without parole. I mean, they asked for the death penalty, knowing that they had made up the evidence against him. I think that's easy enough to demonstrate. And a guy named Frank Gable was a small-time tweaker, thief, low-level drug peddler in Salem. They set him up and convicted him, sent him to prison. What we're doing here is a podcast series. It's a murder mystery now, because the one thing we're sure of is that Frank Gable was not guilty. He wasn't there. He didn't. He wasn't at the scene of the crime. He didn't know anything about it. And it was clear anyway from studying the evidence, but it's much clearer now because this spring, a federal judge ordered him released after deliberating on a brilliant habeas corpus petition by the federal public defender here, Neil Brown, and said, in light of the evidence that he was able to review, some of it old and some of it new, no reasonable juror would ever vote to convict him of that crime. And he's out now, although the damn state is appealing. Although they know their case has been completely demolished, that there's nothing they could possibly take back to trial. They're appealing and trying to put him back in prison for a crime they now know for sure he didn't do. That's where we are now. So in the podcast, we treat it as a murder mystery and follow the course of this. There was a lot of information that what actually was in the official records, investigative records, but which they chose not to pursue because it would have led back to public officials who were probably involved in the murder.
Now, without naming any names, do you have a suspect in mind who you think actually committed the actual physical murder?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
And we also, I think we make a pretty good case of who did the stabbing and who arranged for the murder. Yeah. No one's making a claim that because we can't prove it right now. I mean, we don't have subpoena power, but we present enough evidence so that the podcast listeners, will be able to draw their own conclusions. That's for sure.
Now, in your podcast, do you actually mention this person's name?
Oh, sure.
Okay. Now, is this someone who's
No. This is a very thorough investigative effort, and it's based on extreme all the work that journalists have done to this time. I mean, I was one of them. There are about 4 or 5 others who are very good, and the exhaustive investigation by the federal public defender. I mean, it's just stunningly good, and then our own interviews in the course of this podcast, which takes us beyond that. There are a lot of really great. I can't think. I was thinking of all the different adjectives I could use to describe the interviews. Different interviews with people who were involved in this, who got caught up in this very complicated story. And we present. We name names and talk about how the thing probably went down and who was probably behind it.
Now, the guy who you're fingering for this, the guy you think is good for this crime, is he still alive today?
That I'm not going to get into it because that's a future episode. And we're telling a mystery story.
I know. But you can't blame me for asking, right?
but it's a natural question, yeah. and as you'll see if you get a chance to listen to it, there are a number of people involved in the murder, commissioning the murder itself, and certainly in the cover. Which went all the way up to the governor, who are very much alive.
Oh, really?
So everyone in Salem, whether they were involved in the arranging for the murder or not, it seems, had something to cover up. There was rampant corruption. It had been allowed to continue, not just in the corrections department, which Michael Franke was trying to clean out. But this was the 80s after all, and all the professionals were coked up in the bars. There were mirrors in the restrooms, and the lobbyists, the politicians, the lawyers, the judges, they were all partying, and that's fine as far as I'm concerned, except especially when you're in law enforcement.
Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.
It's utterly compromising. First of all, you're using a substance, an illegal substance, controlled substance, that you're prosecuting other people for using, and to buy it, you have to deal with people in the underworld anyway. I mean, that transaction is illegal. So one of the things I write about a lot, have written a lot about in the books we talked about, but especially Rose City Vice, is how inherently corrupting narcotics enforcement is. Mm-hmm. in the first place, there's only one really good way for narcotics cops to get inside a drug deal, I mean, since neither side is particularly eager to turn in the person they're doing business with, and that's to bust someone, compromise them, get them to turn in someone, and then start working with them. And in other words, you team up with they team up. Narcotics enforcement does teams up with half the crooks against their competition. It's inherently compromising, and it leads very quickly, very often, to corruption, because it's a cynicism which leads to corruption. I mean, they can see that it's a phony game they're playing, and there's so much money, unaccountable money lying around, that they often fall for it, and the cops themselves become corrupt.
Yeah, and when you have these informants out there making these cases for you, you're allowing them to continue in their trade. They're continuing to sell drugs under your.
Absolutely.
Right. So then that gives you access to the use of those drugs that they're buying and selling and stuff as well, and even a cut of their profits and stuff. You can stick your nose in that way too. And I'm seeing now today, especially with this younger crowd of heroin addicts, that with these minor charges, where they're only facing like a year, and they're informing on each other. They're informing on their own friends.
Sure.
Their social network, the whole social network, are all informing on each other like it's nothing, with no consequences either.
Yeah, in Salem, it was cocaine for the professional classes and meth for the man on the street for the lower classes, and the coke dealers somehow are the people in the coke trade, and certainly the professionals who are using coke had nothing to worry about. It was just an open secret. But what you were saying about the heroin dealers, the low-level heroin dealers informing on each other, all the meth dealers, that's how they made the case against the poor fella, Frank Gable, who they convicted of the Frankie murder. They didn't have any physical evidence, not a shred. What they did was to get about 8 or 9 ex-cons, low-level dealers, to make up stories about Gable. They even at one point had before one girl was stricken by conscience. They had 2 people who said that they even saw the murder go down, but they got those confessions. They manufactured those witness statements, I should say, using polygraph tests. They just kept giving polygraph tests until the so-called material witness figured out what story they wanted them to tell, and then they told them the story, and then they put them on the stand. In this case, they've all recanted now. All of them have recanted. And that's one of the main reasons that the federal judge gave when he ordered Gable released. But it all comes from the essential compromising nature of narcotics enforcement. Can't be done.
Now, Gable, when he was, did he have a vigorous defense? Did he have a defense team that was working on his behalf, or were they in on it too?
Oh God, they're completely incompetent. That's okay. And the lead lawyer was drunk. It was awful. It was awful, and that's one of the things we get into here. But he was so bad. He was so bad that he was drinking about a quart of vodka a night during the trial.
Oh boy!
And he was not terribly competent to begin with. It was a sort of a non-defense. Let's for sure is ineffective assistance of counsel. Yes.
Now, was this the public defender's office, or were these appointed by the court?
No. This is a guy who it was not a public defender at all. Someone who was selected by the trial judge, and who made an awful lot of money on the case.
And you suspect that the judge was aware of what went on to as well?
Salem was a small enough town,
right,
that he had to know that this guy was incompetent and a drunk, sure.
Right. And if you're trying cases all day long, you must be aware, you see a bunch of dog witnesses coming through, a bunch of informant drug addict witnesses coming through. And if you're trying cases all day long, you must be aware, you see a bunch of dog witnesses coming through, a bunch of informant drug addict witnesses coming through. You can spot that too,
Oh, for sure. I mean, they knew what they were dealing with. I mean, but although, it wouldn't have been anything too unusual about all these shaky characters, drug addicts providing testimony in this case or any other. I mean, that's standard fare.
Yeah. And it's funny how you talk about the incompetency of these attorneys. Because I do a lot of criminal defense work, and the older I get, and when I was a young kid, I thought all these lawyers, man, I thought they were so, wow, these guys are, they really know what they're doing. And the older you get, man, you just see these guys and you say, oh my God, there's just such incompetence here, man. They just don't know what they're doing. And sometimes,
it's scary.
Yeah, the prosecutor doesn't know what they're doing either. I'm on the phone sometimes with both of them, and I'm telling them, listen, this is your defense of the case, and this is your theory of the case, sir. And then call me when you got this straightened out. It's just fascinating how, and people think our justice system is, it's not like Walmart, it's pretty much a lot like Walmart,
oh yeah. I mean,
there's not a lot of good customer service going on there.
Time and time again. Yeah. I mean, there are obviously some very good lawyers out there, but, if you're in trouble, you better get one of them.
And it's another thing too. You can even get a very good lawyer, and sometimes too, you're not a very good client. You're not a client that's on their high priority list. So even if you got a very good lawyer, you might get slip through the cracks there. Let's take a little commercial break. We're with Phil Stanford, excellent author, investigator. You were a private investigator down in Florida too, I saw.
Yeah, I had a license down there when I was in Miami. I did some private investigative work in D.C. for when I was there, and also in Portland most recently.
Well, thank God you got out of that, man. I'm glad to see you. You got to get out of the PI business. You made it, man. Congratulations, Phil. A White House Call Girl. This is the show he did with us. We did an interview with him previously. White House Call Girl. The Real Watergate Story by Phil Stanford. Check that out and go into our speaker archives and listen to that show. Rose City Vice, another book he's written. Portland in the 70s, Dirty Cops and Dirty Robbers. Portland Confidential, Sex, Crime, and Corruption in the Rose City, and the Peyton Allen Files. But today we're talking about the murder in Oregon. This wrongly convicted Frank Gable just got out. The murder of this Michael Frankie, who was the Corrections Department captain down there. We'll be right back with more Phil Stanford right after these messages. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. We're here today with Phil Stanford, a returning guest. We had him on once before talking about his Watergate book, which is hailed by everyone. Everyone loves this book, A White House Call Girl, the real Watergate story. He's got this new podcast, Murder in Oregon. You can hear it on iHeartRadio. They release a new episode every Thursday, so you can go there right now and catch the first two episodes. There's another one coming up. Former PI, he was telling me in Florida and D.C., which is where I'm going to be headquartered out of. I'm going to Florida, and my daughter's up in D.C. I'll be traveling back and forth. Maybe he can hook me up with some new enemies in that part of the country.
I hadn't thought of it for a while. You asked me about being a PI. At one point, I dropped out of journalism. I'd been working on a political magazine, in D.C., and I really hated politics. I chucked it all and moved to Miami. And for a while, I worked for the Miami News. I was doing detective stories, and enjoying it pretty well. But I think the publisher decided I wasn't cost effective or something like that. I was writing these long stories, and maybe my heart wasn't in it anyway. And so I could see the writing on the wall, and I got a job with a detective agency there. It's called Intercept. And it took me several weeks to learn that this was no ordinary detective agency. They were all ex-CIA and military intelligence guys, and they were all deeply involved in the drug trade. They were doing work like security work, first of all, for one of the major drug importers in Florida. And so while I was still there, and it was a remarkable experience. Up to that time, I'd been sort of a half-assed intellectual writer. I'd written for the New York Times Magazine and on political subjects and military subjects, but I didn't really understand how that world worked, and so not being a journalist and working for them, I was just sort of drawn into the middle of it, and they'd tell me all these great stories. And as I said, after a while, though, I realized that there was a good deal more going on, and then not much after that, I realized they were all under indictment. They'd had grand juries meeting in Houston, Atlanta, and Miami. It was that big a deal. And I ended up, they were working primarily for a guy named Lamar Chester. And this is a great story. Maybe we want to talk about it more some other time. As former Eastern pilot who was one of the first guys to start flying directly from Columbia. He was a legend as a pilot. So he was getting, they'd finally indicted him. It was the IRS who got him, not the DEA, not the customs, and because he'd made his deals with them, the IRS. And
Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.
By that time, they figured if I was down there, and I obviously wasn't that interested in making money. I knew what was going on. I must be there from the CIA, because his defense was that he went public and said, "Yeah, I've flown all these drugs in, but I did it with government sanctions, and including the CIA." And so he had a gray mail defense, and he figured I must be down there to help him with the gray mail defense. And so anyway, that before it was all over, I mean, his threat, of course, a gray mail defense threat is that you put me on trial, I'm going to spill all the beans about what the intelligence agencies are doing. His trial was scheduled for Atlanta, and it was coming up, and they got smart. They'd taken away his pilot's license. He loved to fly. Shortly before the trial, they gave his pilot's license back. He went up in a little Piper Cub, which he could fly blindfolded, for God's sake, and crashed. Obviously, they sabotaged the plane, and that was the end of Lamar Chester. It's one of a domestic CIA murder that no one talks about. But I worked for Lamar. He used to pay me in $100 bills. because I could not convince him that I didn't work for the CIA. And I must admit that I also accepted his money. He was doing research. He thought I was doing research and that he could pay me to get my people in Washington to come to his aid because they'd sort of abandoned him. And anyway, that's my private investigator story from Miami. I probably could have told it a little bit better, or certainly in more detail, but that's where I sort of got my education in this general field. Yes.
Fascinating. Now, is there any chance you think that maybe this plane crash, he might have faked his own death?
Oh God, no. His daughter, his 5-year-old daughter, was in the plane with him. He went up for a joyride, and they had sabotaged the plane. They claimed that he ran out of fuel, but I've talked to people. I went down to. He was flying from Central America to a farm he had in northern Georgia. He owned an island in the Bahamas, which was sort of like a way station.
Sure.
And it was a Motel 6 for drug dealers.
Sure.
And so he was up at his place in Cleveland, Georgia, of course, waiting trial. He one Saturday morning, I think it was, he went up with his little daughter in the plane and crashed. They said he ran out of fuel, which is nonsense. And the daughter survived. I mean, I think she had serious injuries, but she miraculously survived. And there was never an investigation. That one was covered up completely. I mean, you talk to anyone who's involved in it, and they just laugh about it. It was so obvious.
So no book written about it or anything like that?
I'm sorry?
There's never been a book written about it or anything? No.
It's completely escaped everyone's intention. It's something I want to deal with. I mean, it's from my point of view, from perspective or looking at me, it's sort of a funny story because I was a novice investigator, to say the least. I was there because I was a front for a investigative agency that was basically a CIA front. They hired me to handle the stuff that came in from the Yellow Pages because they were so busy. The rest of them were so busy making money in the drug business.
Right.
And by the time they were indicted, they decided I was so no one could be quite as dumb as I was. So I must be faking it, and I must be there with the CIA. And I could never convince Lamar that I wasn't with the CIA.
Maybe that might be a good second season, man, for your podcast. You know, that's tell this story. I'm serious, man. That's a fascinating story. But back to this a murder in Oregon. I had some notes here right before the commercial. The prison system is notorious for corruption, drug dealing, and now you got stuff like cell phone, stuff like that. It's notorious for the corruption that goes on there. How did? Oh yeah,
it's easier to get drugs in the prison than outside sometimes.
Right, and they have this big myth about people bringing it in through their buttholes. This stuff's going in.
Oh yeah,
in huge quantities.
In this case, and we get into this in a couple episodes because it's central to the plot of the story we're telling. They just wives and girlfriends just walked it in.
Oh yeah.
I mean, they made a deal. You're obviously protected if you can do this. Yeah. You're visiting the prison. You come in with drugs, a balloon in your mouth or wherever, and especially if you're not searched, it's no problem. And you transfer the drugs, and you do it again and again and again. It's the guards were bringing in drugs. They had a particular way of doing it. They would if it was marijuana, they'd drive over it with a car, flatten it, and just wear it as a belt going in. I'm not sure exactly how they hooked it up, but it was bringing it in lunch boxes. It was a standard practice. Yeah,
there's tons of contraband in prison. There's no doubt about that. But my question is, though, if everyone knows what's going on there, right? How did this guy, Michael Franke, if he's a Boy Scout, how did he wind up in that position? Like, was he appointed? Was he elected?
Oh, no, he was appointed by the governor. The governor brought him in as someone who would be able to effectively run the system. I mean, he was. They had a building program. They always had things that had to be worked out, and he was brought in as a management expert. He had been down in New Mexico before. He was brought in after the terrible prison riots in New Mexico, where 30-some people were killed, and he cleaned up that place as much as it could be cleaned up. And anyway, in any case, he sort of settled that place down and disciplined whoever he could and punished who he could for the riot, and then was brought from New Mexico to take over the Oregon system.
Was there any indication before they killed him that they tried to make a deal with him? They tried to cut him in, hey, bribery? There are some suggestions that he did. I mean, that he was being courted by the people who were probably behind this. Yeah. Now, Frank Gable, does he appear on the podcast, Murder in Oregon?
Just briefly. I mean, for all the usual reasons. I mean, the state is appealing his case right now. Right. Okay, and or appealing the judge's ruling on legal grounds, whatever they are, and so his lawyer, predictably, does not want him to talk right now. And I talked to him. I've on the phone with him a couple times a week. He's out in the Midwest. He's got his head on straight. It's a remarkable thing. Here's a guy who was sentenced to life without parole. He's going to die in prison, and he knew he was innocent. And the more he studied his case, the more he understood how the people who convicted him, it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accidental miscarriage of justice. They knowingly manufactured the evidence against him. And he knew that. And so what's remarkable to me is that he was able to survive and keep from doing away with himself. I mean, it was a hopeless situation, and he knew that the odds were stacked against him, and he managed to survive. And I think he became a very strong person because of that.
And how long has he been out?
He's been out now for about 6 months.
Only 6 months, my God. Okay, and you're saying he's settled in with family, I guess. How old is he now?
Well, he was married while he was in prison, and
okay.
And a lot of those marriages don't work out,
Right.
But she's a good person, and she's good for him. It's obvious. They settled in a little town, and where a lot of her family is. He goes fishing with them. They go to football games, and he's so happy. I talked to him shortly after he got out, and he was a country boy, half Indian, originally from South Dakota, and then parents had died, and his mother, before she died, actually gave him up. She was an alcoholic. He ended up in Oregon and got in trouble. But he's a country boy, and he talked about how he was walking down the street and there was a kitten. He hadn't seen a kitten for all that time.
Can you imagine?
Been in prison for 30 years.
Cell phones, fax machines. This guy's seen nothing. This guy's nothing.
Yeah.
Now, what about how old is he now?
He's mid-50s.
Okay, that's not so bad. Okay, mid-50s. He's got a whole life ahead of him. I'm in my mid-50s.
Yeah. and I mean, he lost 30 years, but
boy, they grabbed him when he was just a kid. He was a kid.
Yeah, he will do well, and I will continue to do what I can to get the state off his back. I mean, it's really despicable what they're doing. The AG's office out here, they can see that there is no case left. I mean, there wasn't a case in the beginning. It was all manufactured testimony from witnesses who were making up stories, encouraged to make up stories to get out from under charges against them. And that's all it was in the beginning. It was quite clear. But they've all recanted. There is no case left against him. They could not possibly retry him.
Well, let me ask you this.
But still, the state is appealing. I can kind of see
that the state would want to continue these charges, so then he can't sue the state for wrongful conviction. What was the conditions of his release? Was it ruled that he's not guilty, that they overturned the conviction? He's not. It wasn't ruled that he was not guilty. Right. That couldn't be declared. But that the judge said he should be released because no reasonable juror would vote to convict, and that the state must decide whether to retry. The county he was convicted in must decide whether to retry, and so they could never retry him. So what the AG's office for the state Department of Justice is appealing the judge's decision on legal, not on the evidence, of course, but on legal matters. That I think what you said is correct. That they're trying to at least postpone having to pay him millions of dollars for this huge injustice. So the court ruling leaves open the possibility that he can sue for damages.
Oh, sure.
Okay. Does he have an attorney handling that for him?
I don't know who's handling that. The attorney who represented him in these on the appeal is a woman named Nil Brown, and the habeas corpus petition she filed was absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. She would not be representing him when he sues the state, but I trust she will find someone who's she thinks is competent to do it. Yeah.
Oh, well, get a hold of me, man. I'll get you a Beverly Hills lawyer, man. I got a guy on speed dial. Okay, I got a guy on speed dial, man. I'll take this case in a minute. Damn.
Yeah.
Phil Stanford, we're out of time, man. The time blew past. What do you want to leave us with before we go? We only got about a minute.
Well, I guess the best thing I could do right now is encourage people to check out the podcast. iHeartRadio, and it's called Murder in Oregon. You've got 2 episodes you can listen to now. It's beautifully produced. It's absolutely beautifully produced. People at How Stuff Works, or that's the production team. And am responsible in large part for putting together the overall story, but it's collaborative. Since it's a documentary process too, other people are involved in the writing, but I still think it's okay for me to say that the writing's pretty good too, and it's a great story, and if that's the one thing I can leave people with, check out Murder in Oregon.
Every Thursday morning it comes out a new fresh episode. iHeartRadio, every Thursday morning a new episode comes out. Murder in Oregon. Phil Stanford. Phil, thank you so much, my friend. Okay, keep in touch.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Me too.
Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities. Fentanyl. It could be hiding anywhere, including in your house, including in your medicine cabinet, or maybe at a friend's house when you're hanging out, playing games, and get offered a pill. Don't take chances. If a drug didn't come from a pharmacy directly to you, you can find fentanyl using a simple strip you can pick up at your local pharmacy. Don't take it until you test it, because fentanyl can be hiding anywhere. Brought to you by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Mental Disabilities.